Hey there, it's Ben Lawless here. I would just like to talk to you about how you can use developmental thinking to make your tests better. A lot of this has come from the changes that we've seen at the schools I work with, the changes to the tests that they now write after having incorporated developmental thinking into other areas of their teaching. So, let's talk about an example test. So we're going to pretend we're doing a Year 8 geography test here. So say, for example, it's on urbanisation, so about cities. There's 50 questions, it's out of 50, and the feedback you can give to the student is you can give them a number out of 50, like 40 out of 50, or you can give them a percentage, right? So that's lovely. We've given them, so this would be a test of content knowledge. You ask them 50 questions about, 50 do you know these facts? And the feedback that you give them is literally just how much of that knowledge that you tested them on did they know, right? So it's fairly, the feedback tells you, how much of that knowledge they knew, but not which bits of it, whether they knew the hard bits versus whatever. It's not disaggregated, shall we say. It's just one overall number. So I'm going to try and increase the complexity of the planning for the tests that you do in each of these slides. So most people, when they write a test from scratch, would hopefully have some kind of plan about the kind of questions they want to include. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. So that would be your most simple, undistinguished, there's just 50 questions, 50 marks worth of questions just about the general topic called urbanisation. Now, what if we decided to divide the test up into the different areas? So say I had 10 questions that were specifically about vocab and 40 questions that were specifically about urbanisation. So now I could report back to students and parents with a little bit more information. I could tell them that they got 80% of the urbanisation questions right and 50% of the vocabulary questions right. Now, that might be a bit of a pain to give feedback like that. It's a bit more detailed feedback, but of course it's more information that the student can use to improve. So if that student wanted to know how to get better, they would have information. They would know, oh, okay, so it looks like a weakness for me is vocabulary. I need to spend some more time studying vocabulary. As the teacher, you might also be able to look at class trends and see certain sections of content knowledge of your class was weaker or stronger, and that might give you some information about what to reteach or whatever. So they are two simple test concepts. The first one being just a dump of questions that are all about the same thing. This one here, dividing it up into the topics. And we could have added more topics. We could have had, like different types of urbanisation questions. It could have been maybe 4 different sections, and if we wanted to, we could report separately on the results that the students got for the different sections. But I want to distinguish between the feedback that you give and how you construct the test. So you could still have, maybe you had like 5 different topics that the students did and they were divided up. Your test had, section 1, urbanisation, section 2, geography, vocabulary, section 3, push and pull factors, whatever. You could have all those different sections. That would at least send that, then you as the test writer would know I need to ask 10 questions about this, 10 questions about that, 10 questions about that, whatever. If you have very few different topics, so like just urbanisation as one big topic, then you don't know, you can't be certain that you've asked enough questions about all the different types of knowledge about urbanisation. So the more different subtopics that you have explicitly laid out in your test, there's 2 things. Firstly, you make sure that you're answering a broader range of questions. And secondly, if you want to, you can provide feedback about how the student went on the different sections. The point I'm trying to make here is that you don't need to go to this stage here where you provide feedback that's disaggregated about the different topics. You still write a better test if you divide your test questions up into different subtopics. Yep. Because we're about to get a bit more complex, and that's going to be a criticism. So Now they are just questions, these are just tests just with content knowledge. However, a lot of tests also have skills involved. So let's imagine that we've got two skills that we want to assess in our test as well. And they are these two skills, map interpretation and graph interpretation. And we've identified 3 different levels of sophistication that a student can show those skills. Yeah, so with map interpretation, we think, our lowest kids can list stuff. Then higher ability students can explain patterns, and the top students might be comparing some different maps. Same with graph interpretation, we've got 3 different levels there as well. Okay, now if we've got all of these sections, if we know that these 2 skills can be shown at different levels of sophistication, then we need to divide up our test into those different sections. So this is what it would look like now. So here, say we're still only asking 50 questions, so we're only going to have 20 questions about urbanization, 10 about geography, vocabulary. So those first 2, these first 2 here are both content knowledge sections, and then here we've got 2 skill sections, okay? And we can report separately the student's performance in each of those sections. So you could say there it's divided up into 4, or you could even, if you wanted to, you could combine the 2 content ones and have a content percentage and a skills percentage as well, if you wanted to. But remember, your test is still going to be better if you do this, dividing it up into sections, even if you don't even bother with that stuff, okay? Get rid of all of that stuff. Now, as you saw in that last slide though, we had identified different levels of sophistication of interpreting maps and interpreting graphs. So how do we reflect that in the way that we construct our test? Well, we have questions targeted at the different levels on the rubric. So, same example, 20 questions of urbanization, content knowledge, 10 questions for geography, vocab, content knowledge. Now what I've done is, these are the 3 different levels I've identified: listing, explaining, and comparing. I might now go, okay, I want to ask 5 questions about listing information from the map, so I'll just ask them 5 questions, like what's the capital of Japan according to this graph, what sea is north of Australia according to this graph, whatever. And then I want to see whether students can explain patterns. It's a higher level of sophistication of the skill of interpreting maps. So I'll ask 3 questions targeted at explaining patterns, and right up the top, comparing maps. So I can't assess the skill of comparing maps unless I have a question that's got 2 maps on it that the students compare, right? So the first, one of the main points I want to make here about how developmental thinking can improve test construction is that when you think about the different levels of sophistication that a student can show a skill in, you need to ask questions to allow the student to show that skill in the first place. What we found when we brought developmental thinking into our school was that when we mapped out our tests and looked at the skills that they were asking students to show, is that almost all of our test questions were the lower order thinking questions, so literally just regurgitate information. We weren't necessarily asking them to do any higher order stuff like explaining or evaluating or whatever, okay? So having a map of the content but also the skills and the different levels of the skills, okay? You'll see that we've taken that original test that was out of 50 and now we've got all these different sections, and if we want to, we can report the results of the different sections. That will definitely provide more information for the learner about what they need to do to improve. It also gives more information to the teacher about how they can improve their teaching. Maybe they tried a certain thing with vocabulary but their students were getting 50%, so they discovered that teaching strategy wasn't very successful, and so they need to reteach it using a different pedagogy, whatever. But just remember, you don't need to report back the feedback disaggregated in this way to still get the benefits of all of this other stuff, because you've separated into your different sections. However, if you did want to give feedback like that with the different sections, just giving percentages, probably, that's one way to do it, but an even more awesome way to do it could be with graphs. So maybe the students' test results look like that. Instead of them just getting 1 mark, oh yeah, you got 70% on your geography test, give the students this graph, then they can go, okay, my strengths are in identifying information from graphs, my weaknesses are in questioning graphs, yeah, because I got 0% of those questions right. Up here, there might be a weakness there. Maybe that's a weakness in describing graphs. And another weakness might be vocabulary, right? So then a student, because you've disaggregated the different things in the test, now has much more detailed information about what they need to do to improve. Yeah, I need to work on my questioning, I need to work on questioning graphs, I need to work on describing what's in a graph, and I need to work on vocabulary. If you just said you got 70% for that test, then it's not very easy for the student to figure out how they can improve based on the feedback from the test. Now, that seems extremely convoluted and time-consuming. Who's going to actually create this crazy bar graph for every single student, for every single test? It's unrealistic. If you go to my site under this, under the bit about using developmental thinking to improve test construction, you'll see that there is a macro-enabled spreadsheet called Test My Rubric. Made by Adele Hudson. That's her copyright, so if you share it, please acknowledge her. And I'm just going to show you how this kind of thing works. So here, on that top slide, we've got the 5 different sections of the test, and in blue, that's the total possible score that you can get, and in white, that's the score that this pretend student Brett got. Then you click on student 1, that was the student, and there you go, it makes the graph for you. Yep, and it's disaggregated, giving you all the info there. And if you go back to the class tab, you can click on generate PDF, and it will create a PDF for every single student that's on there. What you do is you type in the, once you've got this here, you type in your student names down here, and then click on update tab names, and it'll update the tab names along the bottom, and then you hit create PDF, and that will create a PDF with the name of every single student, and they will get that awesome bar graph showing how they went on the different sections of the test. So the what I really think would be best practice test construction incorporating developmental thinking is something like this. So with I've now added use of geography knowledge as a skill, right? And what I'm saying is the lowest level of using geography knowledge is just remembering facts, just repeating facts that they've learned, yeah? So the test's out of 50, it's still that remembering facts thing is still the biggest part of the test, yeah, because I value the content knowledge that they learn as part of this unit. However, I might also ask them some short answer explaining questions, 7 marks worth of questions, and I might even ask them one little question about evaluating some claims. Yeah. If I didn't divide my test up like this, I might not ask any questions about explaining or evaluating. I might just ask all questions, just regurgitate facts. Regurgitating facts is important, it's needed for higher order thinking skills. No one's denying the importance of their lower order thinking skills, but it's really important, I think, to allow students to show higher order thinking in our tests. So if I was going to create this test from scratch, I would think, okay, what are the skills and the use of knowledge that the students are going to do? Yeah, so this is just the straight up skill, those two there. This one here, that's where I capture how much knowledge the student has, and the lowest level of that is simply remembering those facts, and then further up I might ask them some questions where they had to do something a bit more interesting with the facts. So the great thing about this is, think back to the original test we had. It was out of 50 and there were no sections, and I could just ask 50 random questions about urbanisation and then give the kid a mark, a percentage. Oh, you got 70%. Now what does that mean? Where are their strengths and weaknesses? How can I as a teacher use that information to improve my teaching or to reteach or to change the way I teach? How can the student use that information to know what to do to get better, where their own strengths and weaknesses are? They can't really, but if you make a test like this where you divide up the questions into not only different levels of thinking with the content, obviously this one being probably the most important in terms of how many questions are asked, but also you've got your different skills. Yeah. So you would write a question where students had to identify data. You'd write questions where they had to describe graph information, and then you might write one question saying, you know, what makes you question the data on this graph, or what might be misleading about this graph, or whatever. Yeah. And that question will probably be a bit harder than the other ones. So that is using developmental thinking to improve test construction. It's all about dividing the test up into different categories. Some will be skills, some will be use of knowledge, and I think you'll find that you give your students a better chance to show those fantastic higher order thinking skills that I'm sure you've taught them. Thanks a lot.